because the thing is, when people who used to be lefties and all about tolerance, and people who question GMOs, people who wouldn't eat food because they had GMOs in them, won't allow you to question a novel vaccine, an untested experimental medical treatment that you're being forced to take. The same people who protested GMOs, they won't have. So that's the thing about it's the virulence and the violence that people use against you when you go outside the cult on COVID, whether it be lockdowns, masks, vaccines, or school closings, anything like that. If you have a different idea, you are out of that. You're a bad person, and they feel that it's their duty, and their righteous duty, to smear you, slime you, and kick you out of the cult. I got blocked today over someone on COVID who's supposed to be a super big lefty. It just happened, and all I did was ask a respectful question. And so there's no questions allowed. You experienced it. Jon Stewart's experienced it. Eric Clapton experienced it. He got vaccine injured. There's a guy, I'm not into his music, but my whole life, all I heard was Eric Clapton is this god. I never heard one bad thing about him. All of a sudden, he gets vaccine injured, and he's immediately labeled a white supremacist, racist. And that's the game. Look what they did to the truckers. Look what they did to in the United States. They can't tell the difference between a freedom fighter and a Nazi. They look at the freedom fighters in Canada and they go Nazis, and they look at the Nazis in Ukraine and they go freedom fighters. That's because we're the most propagandized country in the world, and people in the United States don't think they're propagandized. You know, that's the thing about, like, at least in China, when they turn on the news, they know it's propaganda. They know they're being censored. And back in the old Soviet Union, they knew the same thing. But the thing about it in America, there's a handful of billionaires that own all our media. They have all the same interests, intentions, and the same narrative, and that's narrative control. That's all. Well, Noam Chomsky taught us about it back in the 90s, about manufacturing consent. Rachel Maddow, Chris Hayes, Anderson Cooper, Sean Hannity, they're not there to give you the news. They're there to manufacture consent for the establishment narrative, and they do it every time. Why do they all agree on the big things? They all agree on war, don't they? They all agree on COVID. It's really scary. And the only guy who's been telling the truth in corporate media about COVID or our foreign policy is a guy named Tucker Carlson, who I'm told I'm supposed to hate. And the reason why he's able to tell the truth about COVID and foreign policy is because they already took his advertisers away. And so now he has freedom. The only people he has left advertising is Mike the Pillow Guy and catheter commercials. So he has freedom. And the reason why, and so that's why he's the guy doing way better reporting when it comes to COVID and when it comes to Ukraine, when it came to than anybody else on television. And shame on them for letting Tucker Carlson out-left you and outdo you. So I hope I didn't get off track, but it's all the same thing. It's all about narrative control, and that's what Twitter is. You go on there and all those things, see what they're doing to people like Matt Taibbi, and that's called narrative control. And they all work because they know they all work for the same handful of people. And if they get fired from one, it's going to be hard to get. You'll want to get a bad reputation because it's a really small club. And again, it's owned by a handful of billionaires. When Bill Clinton in 1996 passed the Telecommunications Act, we had 50 giant media companies in America. When he passed that in 1996, it brought it down to 6 companies. So now every magazine, every newspaper, every television, radio show, it's coming from the same 6 companies. And that's why we have people living under every bridge. 80% of the workers live paycheck to paycheck. Half the country can't afford a $500 emergency. And we want to blame all our problems on Russia. Russia didn't do this to us. We did it to us. You know, they'll send $100 billion for a proxy war in Ukraine right in your face because corruption greases the wheels of government in that direction. And that's why we can't take $100 billion and send it to California, which would fix homelessness. You know, they say you can end homelessness for $20 to $40 billion, or for $100 billion that we sent to Ukraine, we could have ended homelessness, started it again, then said we were just kidding, and then ended it again. But we won't even do that. This is the end of an empire, Dr. Drew. That's what people don't realize what's happening. We are turning into Brazil like that. We have 1,000 military bases around the world right now. We have 400 military bases surrounding China since the end of the Korean War. We are the world's terrorists. We just set the world on fire. We're doing this. And by the way, okay, I'll stop. I'm getting off track. Let's get back to medicine.
Well, you have, I've got like 5 different topics I want to comment on from that. One is, though, you may like what RFK is starting to say. Robert Kennedy Jr., he is, I've heard those sorts of words about foreign policy coming out of his mouth recently, and he announced a presidential bid